Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third session of our Healthcare and Life Sciences Summer Camp. It's hard to believe that it's August already. Hopefully you guys have taken or have planned a vacation shortly. I'm Amy Waldron. I'm the Executive Business Lead for Healthcare and Life Sciences in North America, and I am the camp counselor running the show. Today's topic is the untapped opportunities for Agentic AI in clinical development. Today, I have Andrew McKinnon, who is the SVP and Executive GM at Medable. Medable is a unified clinical trial solutions company. We'll be hearing a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Just to go over a few rules with regards to camp. Recording. So we are recording each of the summer camp sessions. Once summer camp is over, we will actually make them all available. If you pin the slides, it'll be helpful with regards to making sure that you get the best viewing experience. For Q&A, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. If you guys can put your questions either in the chat function, or if you can, there's a question capability as well. Either way, we'll be going through those. I have Jeff Parker on with me as well from Medable, and he's going to help go through the Q&A with me so that we can ask questions during the session like we have in the past, or make sure that we cover them at the end. And then etiquette, please make sure that you're muted during the call so that it can be really clear for everyone with regards to being able to hear. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew. Andrew, can you do us a favor and introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about Medable, and then we'll dive into the topic.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amy. Yeah, great pleasure to be here. This is my first of these kind of sessions that I've done with Google, and it looks fantastic. So many thanks for the invite. So yes, everyone, my name is Andrew McKinnon. I'm based in the UK. I've been working at Medable for almost 6 years now. But my whilst Medable, which I'll cover in a second, as Amy said, is a Silicon Valley based technology company. My background is very much centered. I think also. Oh, sorry, someone is. There we go. My background is very much in the clinical development and clinical operations oversight space. So I've been in the industry for I hesitate to say almost 25 years now. I've worked at large pharma companies. I've worked at large clinical research organizations or CROs. I've worked at small CROs, and I've worked at small biotech. So I've seen a huge range of different approaches to clinical development, to drug development. And then, as I say, about 6 years ago, I made the move across to Medable, which is the first kind of technology platform company that I've worked for. So it's been a fascinating journey for me. I've learned a huge amount working here, and I'm very happy to be here talking to you about some of the recent developments that we've had and where we can go from. So just a little bit about Medable, for those of you that don't know us. So Medable was founded by Michelle Longmire and a number of other founders, but Michelle Longmire and Tim Smith was one of our other founders. They're still at the company today. They are the CEO and the CTO that we work with. Michelle Longmire, a fantastic visionary. She was a Stanford-trained physician, and she founded the company back in 2015. Whilst she was working at Stanford as a physician, she's a dermatologist by training. Very frustrated with kind of the inability to collect data in a coordinated fashion to support some of the research projects that she was looking at. So Medable was founded back at that point in time, really with the intention of kind of growing into being an enterprise SaaS type platform company that gave the ability to build different types of applications to address different types of issues. Through its early years, the obvious application of what we had into clinical research, clinical trials, became very apparent, and that's where we started to invest some of our time in developing those kind of products. So we started working. We had a number of investment rounds. We've been phenomenally successful with raising money over the course of time, which has given us the opportunity to develop some of these products. We started off developing different products and solutions that would enable kind of the remote participation into clinical studies from patients. So things like televisits, the ability to communicate with doctors remotely, the ability to provide data remotely through ECO or clinical outcomes assessments, the ability to consent into studies remotely through our eConsent platform. So those were some of the initial applications that we developed on the unified platform that we had. And then, of course, I'm sure everyone can recall COVID hit, and we had a huge exponential expansion in what we were looking at, the kind of demand for the services and what we were able to deploy. So over those kind of years, we saw rapid increase in what's referred to as DCT or decentralized clinical trials. We've had great success in deploying that. We're over 300 studies now. You can see the rapid growth that we had, and we've been positioned very well within that by some of the industry assessment groups. So number one from Everest for DCT, and we've won a number of pre-Galleon awards for our digital solutions. So that's kind of Medible's journey. Medible is, as I say, is a unified platform. So everything that we have at this point in time, everything that we deploy, the underlying platform, the applications that sit on it, are all developed by Medible engineers and our product development team. So we are truly a unified platform. Everything is built fit for purpose on that kind of enterprise SaaS solution that we pride ourselves as the backbone of everything we do. So yeah, that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of Medible and where we're at this point in time. Most recently was the release of Medible Studio that came at kind of the tail end of last year, and that's seen some fantastic results in really revolutionizing how people build solutions for clinical trials, dramatically improved the speed, and then over the course of this year, we've been embedding a number of AI solutions into that that have further increased the efficiency and speed and quality of what we've been delivering into clinical research.
Hey, Andrew, I just really quickly before we dive into some of the clinical innovation topics, can you just share your perspective also? I mean, given the timing of when Medible was founded, I think you've got a pretty unique experience of seeing kind of both the traditional and digital natives like perspective on this. Can you just share kind of what some of the advantages have been, or kind of compare and contrast kind of the perspective of being digital native versus some of the more traditional players?
Yeah, I think it's been, Medible's was, I mean, in part a little fortunate with kind of the development journey we've had. There are a number of kind of our competitors, other groups that sit within kind of directly within the area that Medible works, and also some of the other aspects of clinical research. Technology within clinical research is a relatively kind of more modern element that's been deployed. That said, there are a number of kind of companies that are out there that are, whereas Medible, as I said, is kind of everything is built fit for purpose. It's been designed by Medible. It's on a unified platform. There are a number of other groups that are kind of joined together point solutions, I think, or kind of, they're disparate solutions, different technologies. They've been acquired. It's been kind of more kind of inorganic growth. And that presents a number of challenges in different and I'm sure some of the technologists on the call here will probably appreciate this maybe better than I do. But when you've got different systems, different coding structures, different languages, different dictionaries, different ways of storing data, different ways of defining that data across different systems, that becomes very difficult to do a lot of things with in a very quick fashion, very efficient fashion. And it makes it much harder to deploy some of the more novel AI and agentic solutions expanding at this point in time. So that's kind of where I think some of our competitors have struggled with the adoption of some of these newer technologies. As I say, because Medible is kind of at its heart is this unified platform, we have a consistent dictionary, a consistent way of structuring our data across everything that we do. So because of that consistency, it enables us to layer things on top of what we've done in a much more efficient fashion. So we've certainly benefited from being able to adopt these kind of more novel solutions, more innovative solutions in a much more comprehensive fashion than some others have. There was a brilliant article recently on LinkedIn that I saw that was kind of comparing the different ways or different levels of output that different companies will have, where we see kind of this kind of very kind of disparate, different technical solutions with different kind of underlying technologies, data dictionaries, codings. The efficiency that AI will be able to deliver with that kind of setup is really less than 5%. You're kind of using the AI to kind of fix some of the foundational problems with the underlying structure rather than making it a more efficient solution to deliver. Where we see a little less of that, and it's a little bit more kind of joined up, the solutions become a little easier to deploy, and then the figuring there with kind of a 5 to 10% improvement, where you can have in one system you have a particular data point that's generated, and you can use that to influence maybe a data point in a different system. So an obvious example is if you have concomitant medication captured, so patient has started this new medication and I haven't got an adverse event reported in the system that should correspond to that, I can join those 2 points together, I can flag something missing, and we'll start to see some benefits from that side. Where we see something like Medable with a much more kind of AI native approach, the efficiency gains that we can have, the impact we can have is really unbounded. It's where we're starting to see we're starting to drive towards, and I'll cover this with the Medable vision. We start to see much greater impacts on clinical research, and we can start to see 50, 60, 75% timeline reductions, and we're already seeing some of those already.
Okay, quick question on Medable Studio. Someone wants to know, can you explain what Medable Studio actually is and how would people access it?
So Medable Studio is essentially the way in which you can access the Medable platform. So it allows you to build a consistent database or consistent library of reusable data assets, a consistent library of workflows, of notifications, of ways of interacting with the system. They can be then pre-translated, they can be deployed into studies in a very consistent fashion. I'll cover some of the impacts that will have later on. I think some of your questions will start to highlight that. But it's really a way of deploying studies using a library of specific assets that you want to deploy into that. And whereas previously a lot of what we were doing required kind of coding to do that, the Studio approach allows us to do that through kind of point and click interfaces, natural NLP, LLM type models, chat interfaces. So it's a much more simplistic way of interacting with that underlying platform that we have.
All right, let's get moving here. We'll dive a little bit into the pace of clinical innovation and how it is or isn't moving forward with regards to managing the risk adverseness of the industry.
So the graph that you can see here is that the number of drugs, the number of kind of new molecular entities that are approved each year by, this is an FDA specific chart, but this is the number of drugs that are approved each year by the FDA for access to patients. So you can see there, most recently the data from 2023, there were 55 new drugs approved. Go all the way back to 2008, 15 years ago, and we see 24 drugs approved. It's a pretty slow climb on that graph. So that kind of indicates if it were to carry on in that fashion, and you're looking at the 2,000 odd illnesses that are as yet untreated, we're looking at over 200 years to develop drugs to treat that human illness burden. And to Medable, that's unacceptable. What we really need to see is rather than a doubling of that rate, we need to see a kind of a 10xing and higher if we're to develop the medications necessary for those unmet medical needs. And so that current state is something that Medable really takes to heart when we're looking at the kind of the innovation that we can deploy, the way in which we can impact onto clinical research. That number is one of the targets that we have that we think can be more broadly impacted by the work we're doing. And so really that leads us to kind of the medable vision. I'm sure there's a number of people that are familiar with this term, but this is Medible's big, hairy, audacious goal. This is kind of what gets us up in the morning. This is what we use to challenge ourselves. This is what we use to scare ourselves. I mean, this is a very pioneering vision. This is not kind of tinkering at the edges. This isn't looking to deliver efficiencies of an extra couple of weeks or months off a timeline. This is really kind of, how do you fundamentally change the way in which clinical development is achieved? So we refer to this as our 1-1-1 vision. So how can we start a study in a single day? At the moment, you're probably looking at more of a 6-month timeline. How could you do that in one single day? How can you enroll a study in a day? At the moment, most clinical trials kind of enroll patients over a course of probably about a year, somewhere between 6 to 18 months. And how could you conduct that study within a year? And at the moment, average duration of a trial is probably 3 to 4 years. So that's our 1-1-1 vision. Now, it's a little bit, I hesitate to kind of use certain companies, but it's kind of like SpaceX's how do you colonize Mars? It fundamentally changes the way you approach a problem. It forces you to think very differently about the approach you're taking, rather than just taking something and say, okay, well, I used to do this in 16 weeks, how can I do it in 12? By saying, how do I do that in a single day, may not in of itself be an achievable outcome, but it forces you to think very differently about how you can do things. So for example, in Study Start, which is what we're already seeing some significant impacts on, rather than having a system where you're required to build all the different things you're going to do in your study for each individual study, how do you take the approach of putting them into a library, building them there, translating them there, having them approved and ready to go, so that you can deploy those into a study at the click of a button. And then we start to see that kind of one-day Study Start as being something that is potentially achievable. There are obviously indications, therapeutic areas where enrolling in a day may not be possible. Oncology is a prime example. That's going to be very challenging to do. But because we're thinking very differently about that enrollment challenge, we may not get from a year down to 1 day, but could we get from a year down to 6 months? And then by impacting the way in which we conduct studies, actually looking at different endpoints, different ways of measuring the efficacy of a drug, the impact that has in getting us down to 1 year's worth of study conduct means that potentially we need fewer patients. And so therefore we're able to enroll studies quicker. So there's this 1-1-1 goal, as I say, is very much a way of challenging ourselves to think very differently about problems. Because as I said on that previous slide, if we carry on the way we're going, we don't get to where we need to be.
Okay, Andrew, so if you don't mind, we've got a lot of great questions we will cover at the end. Lots of the questions kind of want to know what Medable does and what the responsibility is of the person leveraging the platform. So questions like who's responsible for recruiting? How do you deal with patient engagement? So maybe what we'll do, since all these great questions, I want to cover them, but get through the content. Maybe at the end, after we do your content, do you mind, we can pop back at this slide and you can kind of walk people through. This is kind of what the customer brings to the table. This is what Medable has built in. Would that be okay?
Yeah, fantastic. And okay. I can see some of the questions pop on my screen, and they're brilliant. Okay. They're very, very good, very insightful questions. So definitely would love to come.
All right. Keep them coming, everyone. All right. Thanks.
Excellent. So so then if we jump to the next slide then. So one of the challenges within clinical research, one of the issues that we see as something that is something that we can have a definite impact on, and actually something that some of the challenges that we see are actually kind of more directly addressed by Agentic AI and some of the newer kind of AI-based approaches that we've seen much more recently, so very kind of novel and innovative approaches. But on this graph here, what you can see split out by different therapeutic areas are the different trial durations. So for those of you that don't know clinical research, you would go through typically 3 phases of trial, phase 1, 2, and 3. So you can see those spelt out in the colored bands on the graph here. And then between each of those phases, is a white bar that's representing the white space. And so that, as you can see there, is a very significant amount. If you take, for example, the respiratory indication there, your total duration typically for the development of that molecule is 12.3 months. Within that 12.3 months, you're only actually running trials for 12.3 years. You're only running the trials in that indication for an average of 5.2 years. You're spending 7 years with white space. And so that is a significant amount of time. It's a significant delaying factor. There is a lot of very good things that happen within that space, but I think it's a very good opportunity for us to look at exactly what is going on there, and are there ways in which we can start to reduce that. And different therapeutic areas have different elements of white space depending on what's going on at that point in time. You can see at the bottom the difference between larger pharma and emerging biopharma. All kinds of things going on within this graph here, all kinds of impactful factors influencing how much time is spent in white space and how much in trials. But you can see here that's a very significant issue for the pharmaceutical industry, and one that isn't really measured that often. It's not a metric that I see many companies looking at. So that the kind of things within that white space, the kind of things that are happening once you've conducted the trial, there'll be a period of time spent cleaning data, analyzing data, producing that data into a format that is acceptable to regulators, thinking about the design of the next protocol. As I say, I spent a lot of time in the pharmaceutical industry. I spent an awful lot of time sat around tables talking about different design approaches, what's best to do. So all of those kind of things are factors that sit within that period of white space. Unfortunately, that white space is something that is growing at this point in time. The next slide here, this is exactly the same data. Apologies for the slightly less clean presentation of this one, but I had to grab a screenshot. I didn't have time to make it look too pretty. But what you can see here is the same graph for the 2019 to 2023 period of time. So the previous slide was the 4 years before that. And what you can see on the graph here on the right-hand side, if you look at the change in durations, you can see that for every single indication, with one exception, which we'll cover in a second, the amount of time spent in white space has increased. And that average increase is about 14 months, an extra 14 months spent in white space. There's been some phenomenal work done within companies, very innovative approaches to reduce the amount of time spent in trials. And you can see that actually on average, the amount of time spent actually performing clinical trials has reduced by about 7 months. But overall, that white space has increased significantly, and it has outweighed any of the improvements we've made in actually how we conduct and run clinical trials. As I said, the one exception to that is that band you can see with vaccines, where we saw a huge reduction in the amount of time to develop a vaccine. And I think probably everybody on the call here can give an answer as to why that is. And it's really down to the work we had to do for COVID-19 to get that vaccine work done.
So 2 questions for you, Andrew. One is just with regard to the white space, and you may or may not know this, but does the white space vary at all as you look country by country? Any variations that you're aware of?
The white space, the country where the trials are run wouldn't really impact the white space that much. I'm just thinking that one through. It's an interesting question. The countries would certainly have an impact on the duration of the trials themselves. So the colored bands or the colored bars would be impacted by where trials are run. We see faster trial timelines in some of the untapped markets that are out there for clinical research. Some of the very naive populations where there's not a lot of trials run, they can often recruit faster because there's more patients available. So that does have an impact. But the white space there is really driven by kind of more probably where the pharma company itself is based and the regulators that they're interacting with. I can see a comment there that it's largely driven by the regulators, and I would agree that there's a significant chunk of that time that is kind of regulatory review, waiting for meetings, discussing, waiting for feedback. There is an awful lot that is impacted by the own company processes as well. So, Raj, I totally agree. It is largely driven by regulators. But you mentioned, sorry, Amy, you had a second question as well.
Yeah, so I just wanted to hit the pause button and just talk about COVID and technology and what's being scaled, what's not being scaled. So we had talked in the past because obviously, I mean, cloud technology has given everyone the ability to do so much with regards to interoperability and create certain levels of scale from a compute perspective. But there are also, there are some things that you couldn't scale before generative AI. And so can you just kind of walk through your point of view on what the world was like from a COVID perspective and trying to kind of navigate the vaccination creation, and then even like the last 12 to 24 months, like what hopefully has been like an aha moment on being able to help the humans in the process?
Yeah. It's a really interesting dynamic. The COVID-19 situation was, I mean, hopefully something none of us ever have to live through again. But it did present kind of that old adage of necessity being the mother of all invention. It did impose upon us a situation where we didn't have the time to run through the standard development process. Vaccines are drugs that can be developed quicker, that there are processes in place. There is a slightly different way of doing it, and it's a slightly different molecule type. But we didn't have the time to go through the normal channel. So some of the things that were done during that period were done out of necessity. There were a number of things that some of the pharma companies did that were very risk-based. They ran some of their manufacturing at risk. They were prepared to invest upfront to get some of those things ready, so that actually as each phase moved through, they were ready with those supplies. That's one of the things that can sit within that white space time. But the really interesting piece was how the regulators responded to this, which I think is back to Raj and your question about how do we fix that. I don't think it's necessarily a case of fixing it, but what the regulators and the pharma companies did was this kind of rolling cadence of review and approval. So the pharma companies would be generating data, they would provide it to the regulators would review it in real time. So it was just backwards and forwards. It meant that, I mean, anybody that was involved in any way at all with the development of some of these vaccines will remember days, if not weeks, of sleepless nights. People, camp beds in offices. It was very much a problem that was solved by human capacity, human resources. We just threw bodies at it. There were people working ridiculous schedules and hours to get this development work done, and it was that enabled us to do that dramatic reduction of white space in that process. But it is certainly not. The approach itself, I think, is certainly one that is scalable. The way in which we solve that approach is not scalable at all. It's not feasible to use that kind of human capacity approach for something like that. That said, this is where I start to see some of the solutions or some of the approaches that agentic AI can start to provide. And back to my original comment about kind of consistent data formatting, dictionaries, all these kind of things. This is where I start to see some of the potential impacts. We've already seen some of the regulators coming out and showing that they are starting to use AI-based review tools. They're starting to make more efficient review processes and decisions on their side. So this is where we're able to start looking at that kind of agentic approach, to take data from its source, from where it exists, pipe it directly into the regulators, and have that rolling review that's powered by an AI-based system. We obviously still need to maintain the human in the loop aspect of that. There are still elements that the human brain is better at doing. There are still decisions that need to be made that are made by humans and must be made by humans, because you're dealing with very foundational ethical issues for development. But there are very definite roles that AI and agentic AI particularly have to play in making that kind of process work. Not quite to the degree that we had for COVID, but there was a very interesting case study that Medable has, as I say, because of the foundational platform that we have, because of this unified approach. We worked with one particular company in the weight loss market, for a drug that they had, where they wanted to get results out as quickly as possible. Because of the standardization of everything that is underlying Medable at the beginning of the study, we were able to build that study very fast, get it out very quickly. But at the end of the study, which is typically for everybody, I can see a number of comments from people that are out there running trials. People will know that at the end of the study, you go through a database lock process. That takes many, many weeks to get the data clean, to get to a point of locking it from the last patient, last visit. You then need to run the analysis, you then need to clean that up, you need to put it into the appropriate formats and to get it out to release your results. We were able to work with that company to go from database lock to press release with top line results in a 2-week period of time. Now that kind of very, very significant improvement on what we've seen before is the kind of thing that hints at some of the benefits that Agentic AI can start to deliver in replicating or moving the industry more towards what we saw with COVID.
Yeah, and we definitely are. Yeah, we definitely are. I mean, people can chime in if they want on this topic, but I am pleasantly surprised over, I would say, the last 12 months, how we are really seeing the use of generative AI and agentic capabilities in the clinical environment. I think the first kind of go-to was thinking through operations and everything with the human in the loop and very kind of use case as we're kind of testing this technology out. What has happened over the last 12 months that I think from a quality perspective has really helped everyone use this responsibly is, first of all, the volume of models that really have high quality clinical context and the ability to ground data and really have this tracking. Like search and summary, it is a terrific capability of generative AI when you have the ability to really ground it so it's auditable. All of a sudden you really do have a useful assistant, and we're seeing it more and more with our AI co-scientists. And when you actually have a research agent that is helping you but yet still giving you the ability to see the sources, but it can go through thousands and thousands of different literature and serve it to you so that it's helpful. These are the types of things that they all add up with regards to acceleration and even being able to draft. Again, not taking away the decisioning, but being able to help facilitate the process and really serve the information that's needed so that you're coming in and you're doing your knowledge role kind of where needed in the process. So it's a huge step forward. Industry.
Question about kind of what have we done over the last 12 to 24 months that has kind of advanced this forward. It's to me, it's really more of a case of what's happened over the last 12 to 24 days or even hours. At the moment, we have a product team together face to face in Chicago that are working on a few bits and pieces. And the things that they were, the things that they're producing now, we couldn't have done weeks ago, months ago. The things that are becoming potentially viable from an agentic AI perspective because of the advancements that you're seeing are changing constantly. And of course, this presents a very real challenge for the pharmaceutical industry because we are so highly regulated for very obvious and for very valid and good reasons. We should be. But it does present a really challenging environment in which to drive innovation. Medable from its very inception has been a company that has been all around innovation, but it is a challenge to put it into that clinical development framework. We see a lot of kind of we'll pilot something, we'll work on something, we'll do it in a study, in a very small study, and it's very difficult to translate that, and that's where the scale piece comes in. It's very not easy. It's easier, much easier to do a very innovative thing once in one study. It becomes very difficult to take that innovation, which is often driven by, kind of humans working really hard to do something different. It's difficult to take that scale, to take that innovation and scale it across an enterprise of 50, 100, 200 clinical trials. That's a much, much harder thing to do. And that's where I think some of the support factors will start to come from the agentic AI. It's a much kind of cleaner and easier thing to look to scale without requiring some of the human resource and human capital aspects that traditional scaling has required.
Yeah, and you mentioned something with regard the 12 minutes, 12 hours. What people always ask me, how do I future-proof my investment in cloud? and with generative AI. I think the reality is that there will be innovation coming faster and faster. So if you're thinking about how to future-proof what you're trying to do, I think the first thing you should be thinking about is, first of all, how is my information secure? Second, it's how do I actually have a platform that enables me to ingest the next best thing? Because the innovation in this area is coming so fast. And the last thing that you need to do is be locked in to any model, any tool. So really thinking through as you're going into the cloud or as you're working with different clouds, is it secure and does it give me the flexibility to work with first and third party data sources, but also first and third party platforms, applications, models, agents. So thinking through how do you actually put yourself in an environment that gives you that choice, but also enables you to create innovation and ingest it almost real time in an environment that you can control that's secure. So I think, the future is definitely going to be one that is this constant moving technology. The good thing is I think that it's going to make it more accessible to people, and it's also proving out to be less expensive over time as these things become a little bit more commonplace.
Absolutely.
All right. Do we want to move on to the next slide and then we'll dive into some Q&A?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that the final part there was really just kind of the approach that we're looking at the moment, and certainly one that we're working very closely with our customers on, is trying to identify where we have opportunities to apply agents. What are the kind of spaces, what are the kind of problems where it works really, really well? So there are kind of 4 items that we would look at where kind of an agentic AI approach would be a very sensible thing to do. Back to your comment, Amy, I think the other part as well from here is that the pace of development and change within AI is so incredibly quick. I think there are people out there that are probably thinking, well, I'll wait until it gets to the next phase or the next step before I invest. I'll wait. And there's kind of that point of, where do I jump into this? Where do I start to use this? Where do I start to apply it? And I think that moment is probably yesterday. If you're waiting, you're missing out on huge opportunities to both embed AI within the processes that you're working on, but also just to embed it within a company, start to understand and start to work with it and get familiar. You said like the data security, all of these kind of things need to be worked out, and the longer people wait, the less opportunity you have to do that, and the more you'll get left.
Yeah, and you can't do it all. And so this is where I think the mindset of I'm going to build this, or I'm going to build everything on my own, you will be left behind in most cases because there's just too much going on from an evolution standpoint. So, I really do kind of push people to think through, building, buying, or partnering, and looking at the ecosystem and all the existing players. Choose the partners that are investing in making sure that they are bringing you the most current innovation, the best offerings, and then figure out what you actually need to invest your resources in, and make it be like invest in your core competency and look around you at the ecosystem and grab those partners that are going to continue to bring you forward because of the relationship that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the 4 items here on this slide, these are some of the things that we think kind of are useful to identify opportunities where agentic AI can help out. So anything repeatable and rules-based but very data-rich, that makes it quite a hard thing for a human to do, but it makes it a perfect opportunity for an agentic AI solution to work. Anything that requires multiple source context, anything where you're pulling lots of different bits of information across different sources and you need to combine that together. Anything that is bottlenecked by human availability, or anything where there's kind of a continuous and adaptive response required. Those 4 things make ideal kind of ground for agentic AI to be applied. There was a question actually I was looking in here about, talking about recruiting patients, and what kind of things are in there. And I think there's a very obvious piece within this that kind of helps. And when we talk about one-on-one, kind of some of the things that potentially could solve some of these problems, enrolling patients typically is a case of somebody at a site at a hospital with a population of patients trawling through medical records, trying to identify, I have a person in front of me, do they meet the eligibility criteria for that study? Now it's repeatable, it's rules-based, there's a ton of data involved in that process. It requires context from multiple sources, and it's dramatically bottlenecked by human availability. If you had something that was able to take data from different sources, review the context that kind of can be gained, can be applied to an agent, given the different sources, the protocol, the inclusion criteria, the different kind of rules-based things that we have within that, and is able to do all of that analysis, pull the different patients out and present them to the human. So now what I'm doing as a human in that situation is I'm looking at the patients in front of me that I probably know I'm able to identify who is the right kind of candidate to come into the trial, but I haven't had to trawl through 1,000 patients to find the one. The system finds the one. I'm able to then do my human in the loop activities. I apply my human creativity, my human brain, my understanding of that person. And so these are the kind of things where when we look at some of the challenges and we think very differently about the approach, these are the kind of things that will get us to that point of being able to enroll studies, maybe not in a day, but maybe we can enroll them in a month or a week. There was another comment in there about somebody looking at the desire for speed within that one-on-one, so the conduct piece. Again, if we're looking at different ways of measuring the outcomes within a study, doing something very differently could get you to a point where you can do something much quicker. So if we look at some of the traditional endpoints, there are some very obvious examples that are a little bit archaic. A 6-minute walk test is one, measuring how far somebody can walk in 6 minutes. They just literally loop backwards and forwards in a hospital corridor and walk 6 minutes. It's archaic, it's challenging, it's difficult to apply, it's hugely variable. If we were to take a look at something like a wearable sensor measuring actigraphy, and we can use agentic AI approaches to review that data and identify periods of time where we can measure something called SV95C, and this is particularly relevant in something like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So what is the 95th centile of stride velocity? That kind of analysis is a much more precise and focused way of assessing the impact of the drug on that particular individual. That's the kind of thing that allows us to do things much faster. It can be a very difficult thing to do with human reviews of this kind of data that's coming in. We're now talking about millions of data points collected in a very short space of time. But analysis of that with AI is a great use case of identifying new ways of measuring drugs, different biomarkers, looking at huge data sets and identifying the variability within that, where it's focused to a particular drug response, and creating new digital biomarkers. And these are the kind of things where the regulators are very open to these kind of conversations, and looking at, you used to measure these kind of things with very traditional endpoints. They're very open to the conversations of looking at better ways of measuring it. They want to have fewer patients enrolled in trials. They inherently expose patients to risk. So you want to reduce that. You want to do them faster. They want to get drugs to market quicker. So I think there's a lot of things that sit within this goal. And as I say, looking at things differently, trying to change the way we implement clinical trials will start to move us towards these kind of things.
So Andrew, there's 3 questions that kind of came about during the slide that we hadn't covered. So let me just share the topics. Then we can think through if you kind of walk through what you offer and what others have to do, or if you just handle each one of these one off. But one question had to do with what types of AI solutions do you have with regards to patient engagement, or just patient engagement in general, if you want to cover that as a topic. The other one was, as you look at this model, how does safety monitoring and adverse effects come into play with regards to the speed here? And then in general, with this 1-1-1 concept, how does it have an impact on affordability in therapeutics, or does it? It's a lot, but we have a couple of minutes. I figure you can dive into a few of those.
Let me start with the last one, because that's an interesting one, and very much outside the purview of Medible. We don't make drugs, we don't price drugs. I will say that there is, depending on your articles, I would recommend you to take a look at the Tufts Center for Clinical Research, for Drug Development, sorry. They've released a paper recently. The average cost of developing a drug is about $2.4 billion. And you've got a very short space of time after that. Most drugs are released, they have a 25-year patent cycle. Most drugs are released between the 10th to 15th year of that process. So you've got a reduced amount of time to make that money back. That drives drug prices. If we're able to develop drugs quicker, if we're able to reduce that 10 to 15 years down to single digits, that's extra time for drug companies to be able to make that money back. If we're able to conduct trials more effectively with fewer patients, fewer sites involved, then actually the drugs become cheaper to develop themselves. That development process reduces in cost. Whether that translates to greater affordability, I will leave that to other people's decision-making process. That's not my job, but I think there's certainly a strong message that this would make drugs more efficient and less costly to develop. What was the first question you said, Amy? That was definitely one that I thought.
Patient engagement. What, like when you look at the platform, what, if anything, do you have to assist with patient engagement?
Patient engagement's an interesting one within clinical research. Typically, patients are kind of present within clinical research for, depending on the schedule of assessments that the protocol requires, they'll be in a doctor's office for maybe 15, 20 minutes, sometimes longer. Some visits go on for hours, but they'll be in every 3, 4, 6, 8 weeks, whatever the schedule requires for a very short space of time. That's a difficult kind of concept to keep someone engaged in. So one of the things that Medable has is a way of interacting with patients on a much more regular basis from the comfort of their own homes. So they're able to participate in the study, provide data from remote to a site. They don't have to come in. That in of itself is very burdensome. I think the figure is 70% of the US population live about 2.5 hours from a clinical research site. That's not a great place to be. That's very difficult. So allowing people to participate remotely from home, still providing the kind of quality of data that you need from an engagement perspective is something that we see very positive response from. We see much higher adherence and compliance rates in the studies that use this kind of technology than we've seen traditionally.
All right, I know that was quick, but our 45 minutes have come to an end. So I wanted to thank you so much, Andrew. This has been terrific. Hearing what you're doing, seeing what you're doing, and the engagement with all the Q&A. So thank you for that. Thank you for everyone for being so active with regard to the questions. The next session is going to focus on the future of healthcare. So it's going to be mostly focused on payers and providers, a little bit of life sciences, leveraging AI data and cloud for transformative growth. I think that one will probably look at little operational efficiency as well as revenue generation, leveraging generative AI. So hope to see you guys shortly in a couple of weeks. Take care.